Tbate family, what up? I'm finally here. I am finally here, okay? I know it's been a few weeks. I'm so sorry. You know, I've been caught up. I just wrapped up my Tower of God Season 3 complete review, and I've been reading Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint and really enjoying that series, so I've been forgetting to record my Tbate reviews, but here we go. I got about 5 chapters to catch up on, and we got some stuff to discuss. So we're covering the aftermath of the battle between Arthur and the retainer Uto, and the run-in with Seris the Scythe. Now at this table we have the Decathlon Council minus Aldir, who we have no idea where he is. They're going over the accounts of what happened to Arthur, where he's given his take on his battle with Uto, the betrayal of the dwarves and everything. They're covering everything, and then there's also General Aya, who's given her account of everything that happened. So one of the immediate things is King Glader has no problem calling out Arthur on how he managed to defeat a second retainer. And I think it's a fair question, even though there's this weird energy between, you know, Glader and Arthur. I feel like the relationship between like the Glader family, at least the king and the queen, has been weird ever since like they voted to imprison Arthur. Things have been a little bit awkward. So I think it's more so like King Glader thinks Arthur is a little bit like too big for his britches, but he also is a lance now, so he can't necessarily say anything against it. But anyway, it was a fair question because it's just like defeated 2 of them. Explain how you did it. So Arthur, you know, he made up a story. We know what actually happened. You know, Seris ended up killing Uto for Arthur, giving him horns, and that's it. But Arthur came up with a story with Uto being this big taunty guy, which he was, but he ended up letting his guard down, and Arthur and Sylvie took advantage of it. They happened to be able to damage one of his horns, which cut his power and allowed them to win. Now, as you can see, Byron not going for that, but it is a little bit of a bullshitty excuse. And they move on to the conversation about the dwarves, where King Glader is really upset about not being able to punish them, with Aldir not being there, and they have to find a way to deal with the situation, because the dwarves are still a faction within the Decathlon that they need the strength for. So they have no idea how to handle this, where Arthur makes a suggestion where, well, if Radius's capture hasn't been made public, if we could figure out their communications, then we can pretend that he's still running things and just send orders here and there. You know, the fake king strategy, you know, and that's something obviously Arthur would come up with, right? And so that basically wraps things up there. And it ends with, you know, Arthur and Aya being awarded for their efforts, because obviously Arthur did defeat another retainer, despite us knowing the truth. And to a surprise, Arthur asks for time off. We see him going to visit Ellie and Boo, and that's where the chapter ends. So going into 208, Arthur is obviously with Ellie. They're discussing, you know, everything that's been happening with her, how school going, her training, and they get into a conversation about how Ellie has kind of been a little bit sheltered. She's been being raised in the castle for a little, now that Arthur is obviously a lance, and she isn't getting a chance to really make friends because most of the people are nobles, and she really wants to attend the academy. So Arthur promises to talk to his parents to see if she can go, because she needs to thrive in a better environment, right? After that, Arthur is walking and he runs into Gideon, who's having a problem with the supply lines on the warfield, where Arthur makes a suggestion to him like, hey, how about you optimize the routes? That way, you know, we can be more efficient with timing and how we get it there. And as he's discussing this, we have a new character that pops up. Her name is Alanis, and she is Arthur's newest, directly given to him by Virion. She's here to escort Arthur to the second part of what was granted to him. We get a little flashback of what Arthur asked for, and he asked for time off, which is, we find out, is 2 months. And he asked to be trained to get better with his magic. And before the chapter ends, in the panels, we see 3 unknown new characters and Catelyn. You know, Catelyn is Bay low-key. Sweeping into 209, we see Gray. Gray is at the academy that he got into, and he's being tested to see his ki. His ki isn't all that impressive, but he know, and we already know that Gray can box. So in an exam where he's going to have to go in a 1v1 type of battle scenario, and he gets put against somebody who's in a very well-known family. Unfortunately, the chapter cuts right then and there, which makes me a little sick, but we cut back into Arthur, where we get to meet the 4 conjurers. You know, again, we already know Catelyn, who's been training under Varay, so her ice magic is really getting, you know, top tier. Her ice magic has really grown, and she's gotten a lot stronger. But we get to meet Hester Flamesworth, who, you know, Flamesworth is Jasmine's family, and she specializes in fire, obviously. And then we have Camus, who's an elf, who specializes in wind magic. And then, obviously, it would be a dwarf named, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Bubenhog. who is an Earth dwarf who seems to be very close to Virion. And Arthur questions Boomermog's introduction into this group because right now the dwarves are kind of like at weird odds with obviously the elves and the humans with this war. So he's just questioning why this guy wasn't made like the new rep. But we haven't seen that yet, so I guess we'll see what comes of that, if anything. You know, the initial training begins where they're kind of going to do just like a small dance off to kind of get to know each other. Emily, Gideon's assistant, fits Arthur out in a new fit that's supposed to, I guess, help with the training. We don't actually know what it does. But the chapter ends with both Arthur and Gray in a cut-in-half page where they're both about to begin their battles. Now, 210 starts with actually Tess and her group with her fighting Dervis 1v1. After the end of the fight, Tess gets a letter from Virion just letting her know what's going on at the castle, things that are being updated with Arthur, and her obvious shock that Catelyn's with Arthur right now. Kind of hilarious. I love that bit. Now, the rest of the chapter is mostly this fight on the training grounds where it's a really decent fight, and Arthur seems to be struggling a bit, at least in his base form. The four conjurers are working very well together with each of their respective elements. They're attacking off angles, they're attacking his feet, they're comboing skills. It's like really, really well done, and Arthur is having a hard time with it. And they starting to say like, hey, you're underestimating us, show us what you got. So Arthur obviously is going to pop Realm Heart. And the chapter ends with, you know, Arthur saying, all right, let's get a little serious. This isn't going to be like the full training. I'm not here to train Realm Heart, but I'll show y'all what I got. Now, chapter 211 starts with Arthur and Realm Heart, and he's obviously being attacked after he's spread out. Catelyn is really analyzing him to see what he's doing, and she doesn't realize until he decides not to attack her that Arthur's not taking her serious. So she pops a new spell, I guess she learned from Varay, which kind of turns her body, I guess, part ice, because you see her body starts to freeze, and a spear. And she ends up like running in on Arthur, catching him completely off guard, allowing another combination from Hester and Boomermog, where we get this cool panel of like this rock with blue fire, and they end up catching Arthur, even though for the most part, he did dodge most of their attacks. He did burst one of Catelyn's spells with no problem. This moment, it kind of ended the rest of the fight where Arthur gets caught and runs out of Realm Heart. With the fight ending, they go to analyze everything that's happening. Arthur asks questions about like the armor and the facilities that they're working in, where Emily explains that the facility and the armor, the facility is able to measure the spells, the impact of different spells, how they're attacking, the speed of them. And then Arthur's suit is able to measure what amount of output he's putting in his magic. So he uses wind magic faster than he uses lightning, and how he switches between the two. And this is where we learn Alanis' ability, his assistant, that she's able to kind of read people's magic stat, where when he pops Realm Heart, she says that it's almost impossible to read how fast he's using spells and how fast he's moving. So that's an interesting development. Arthur does need to improve, and he already knows that. But again, we're not here to train Realm Heart. But it's kind of one of those things where, like in Dragon Ball Z, you know, Goku always trained his base form like really, really hard. That made it easier for him to, you know, use less energy to get into Super Saiyan, and, you know, he optimized it that way, and that always worked out. So I think Arthur is taking a similar approach where he wants to train his base stats, where I think he should, because Realm Heart shouldn't be the end-all be-all, just like Super Saiyan wasn't the end-all be-all for Goku. In 212, where we see Arthur and Catelyn are walking the halls, they're discussing what Catelyn's had going on, how she's been training with Varay, what's going on with her family, and they do their little flirty, dirty thing, which I really do like Catelyn's character. I don't know what it is. I always like the shy girls who aren't afraid to necessarily step up, you know, because she isn't afraid to, you know, talk to Arthur. But they also discuss about the conjurers and, you know, how they know each other, and apparently they were really big figures back when the Cotton had its own little civil war going on. It only made sense that like Virion would know these people. And in the end, we see Arthur and Catelyn say goodbye, which they'll see each other again because they're obviously training together. We move on to me, like the most interesting part of this is, you know, Arthur going to visit Mika. I really like Mika's character. She's pretty cool. I like the way she talks. She's she's one of those genius characters who doesn't necessarily mean to be a genius, but she is. She's locked up in a cell, living pretty comfy, but they've pretty much got her locked down where they have to figure out, you know, what the dwarves did, how deep involved she was. And Arthur tells her, like, you know, the proof's coming, you don't have to worry. And he also discusses with her like his training, and she gives him a couple tips and everything. And I really like Mika. She's like one of the most honest characters in the story. I do hope that she does get released soon and is able to, you know, join the fight again. Obviously, they're going to need another lance. Like, they can't lose their lances, right? And so the last bit of the chapter is Arthur absorbing Uso's horns. I was a little confused at first before I went back to go reread this. Arthur's just talking to Sylvie about, them being able to split the horns, and she uses one, he uses one, and Sylvie, gives her concerns about, consuming it, and, Arthur wants them to be strong, like they're struggling. Seris didn't necessarily seem like she was being necessarily like evil or that she was plotting anything, so let's just do this and let's see what happens, and we'll cross that road when we get to it. So Sylvie has no problem extracting the mana from it, but Arthur seems to be having a tough time. And then in the midst of it, it kind of gets absorbed into his hand, and Arthur kind of like freaks out, like, why'd you take it? And then chapter ends. So I had to go back and reread because I was a little confused while I was reading it, because I'm trying to figure out what and who he's talking to. And it seems like his sword absorbs the mana. We know that his sword was already broken, so it was already in the right state, right? If the sword absorbs it, then the sword obviously gets to become stronger or can be forged to be stronger. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that, but that sounds very interesting. It sounds like Arthur's going to give himself like a new, really, really crazy weapon. And I guess no really mana boost? I'm not sure what the results of this or how this is going to work out. Obviously, you like novel guys always do, but interesting development. I can't wait for tomorrow's chapter. I'm really looking forward to seeing the fight. I did peek at it just to see. It looks like Gray's on the cover and it says 1v1. So maybe we get to see Gray's 1v1 in the academy. I would really love to see how Gray actually fights against other people, especially somebody who's probably cocky from a family. We'll see how it plays out, right? So yeah. I'll try to, put out my next review in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Bear with me. I am trying to cover Orb as well, and we don't know what Tower of God's coming back. So thank you, tbate fam, for being patient with me, and I appreciate it. I'll see you guys soon.